Hi everyone, Samir and Sumit here, and welcome back to our Formula One podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2023 Mexico City Grand Prix.
And this was certainly a very interesting race, definitely.
Yeah, it was definitely a really, really exciting race.
Yeah, so going on into FP1 this weekend, a lot of drivers now, the battle at the bottom was again another major talking point to see which team will come out on top at 7th place. Obviously, the battle at the top already decided between the drivers and the constructors, so now it's just at the bottom.
You have the teams like Alpha Tauri, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and Williams all battling for that crucial 7th place, for those crucial millions of dollars that they could earn as prize money. So all the points they would gain throughout the rest of the season would be really important.
Yeah, so now going on into FP1 then, and Max Verstappen once again just looking like Max Verstappen, as he set the fastest lap of the session. Max Verstappen, I think, now is 4 times a winner in Mexico City so far. 17, 18, 21, and 22. Yeah. 4 times a winner in Mexico City. So I think he's the most successful driver there. So he definitely knows what to do and how to win this race. But he had a little bit of issues throughout the stadium section. He had a minor lockup, but luckily that was pretty much it for him. Fernando Alonso, we saw in his Aston Martin losing the rear of his Aston Martin going into the stadium section, but was able to keep it under control. And we also saw Lando Norris running wide at the same spot where Alonso lost the rear.
Yeah, the exit curb on turn 12 was really catching a lot of drivers.
Yeah, it was very high. All the curbs in Mexico City, I think, are very high. But we also saw some racing action too between the McLaren of Lando Norris and one of the Red Bulls, as that Red Bull went deep and Norris was able to just get a switchback. So, but luckily none of them were fighting too aggressively.
Yeah, this track was really dusty, so it took a lot of drivers a lot of time to clear. Some track, like all the dust off the track, and so that's why some people were struggling. But then, that's why other people also didn't want to give up track position, which led to more of the racing action that you were talking about earlier. And this would be an important race for Sergio Perez as he was trying to bounce back. Obviously, with Ricardo in the Alpha Tauri, now Perez is under more pressure again to deliver, and he would have to deliver at his home race. And Williams also would have to deliver too, because they would need to be flying with both cars if they would want to secure more points.
Yeah, and Alex Albon was certainly flying in this session as he ended the session off in P2. Yes, P2 for Alex Albon in the Williams. It was mighty impressive from him, actually ahead of Sergio Perez. So Albon was certainly flying up there for the Williams, but Logan Sargent was just down there in P14, so he definitely had his work cut out for him.
Sainz also, we saw, had some issues in his Ferrari. He lost power steering into turn 1, and he just could not turn the car. So that was a hydraulic issue on his Ferrari, and they would need to fix that soon for qualifying.
And we also saw the McLaren of Lando Norris as he exited the garage have a little bit of an issue with his McLaren. He was saying to the team something was happening, and he just said that there was not enough revs. And he said he felt like the throttle was kind of stuck on. So he definitely wasn't happy about that, but they were able to get it fixed.
We also had so many rookies in this session. There were so many new faces on the in the field for this session. We saw Teo Porcher in the Alfa Romeo, even though unfortunately really bad luck for him, that Alfa Romeo ended up breaking, and so Porcher only got 4 laps in, which was really disappointing for one of the F2 title contenders. His title rival in F2, Frederick Vesti, was in the Mercedes. Then we had Jack Doohan in the Alpine, Isaac Hadjar in the Alpha Tauri, Oliver Behrman in the Haas.
Yeah. And also, we saw Isaac Hadjar running a lot of that green flow paint on the Alpha Tauri, trying to collect data for Alpha Tauri. And a lot of drivers just running laps and trying to make sure, especially the rookies, just collecting data for the teams, not trying to push the car or set quality laps, obviously.
We saw Oliver Behrman, though, pushing hard, and he went wide again on that exit curb it was turn 12. So he went wide again on the exit of turn 12. And so even though the rookies technically don't need to push, they obviously know that this is their best shot to impress the Formula One team principals for a potential future seat. So obviously you're going to be pushing.
Yeah. So the final standings at the end of FP1 were Max Verstappen was at the top. Then was Albon in a very surprising P2. Then Perez in P3. Then came Norris, Leclerc, Piastri, Sainz, Ricciardo up there in P8. Then came Ocon and Stroll in P10.
Going on into FP2 now, it was more setup changes for the drivers, but Fernando Alonso we saw had a big mistake.
Yeah.
It was into the S's at turn 7 and turn 8 where he just lost the back end of his Aston Martin, but thankfully he was able to keep it out of the wall.
Yeah.
So it was great car control from the two-time world champion, but nevertheless the tires were destroyed, and it would be maybe a slight dip of confidence for Alonso, but at the same time he would need to know he would need to find that limit, and a lot of drivers were struggling everywhere. We saw Sergio Perez oversteer at the final corner. We saw Nico Hulkenberg lose it also at turn 8, and the same with Lando Norris. So a lot of drivers struggling with those high curves and dusty tracks.
Yeah, even Logan Sargent at turn 2 taking off the bollard, just taking a lot of inside curve. Sargent definitely needs a clean weekend, and hopefully he can bounce. He can continue to impress after his points finish in the United States. So hopefully he can continue to have a seat for next season and the future. But once again, it was Max Verstappen who was at the top of FP2 after another impressive lap. And this time, Lando Norris was up there in P2 as well. Perez was slipping down the order too. And we also saw Daniel Ricciardo continuing to impress in his AlphaTauri.
Ricciardo was flying. He wasn't too far behind Perez. He was flying as well as the Ferraris, while Sainz was 11th though. Charles Leclerc was up there in 3rd, so Leclerc showed some really good pace.
Yeah, and we also saw Lewis Hamilton up there too for Mercedes in P7, not really where they wanted to, but ahead of George Russell. Both Mercedes seem to just be trying to fight their car so far throughout these sessions.
Yeah, Mercedes seem to struggle.
Yeah, it's maybe something with these high altitudes up in Mexico City.
Yeah, in Mexico the air is really thin because it's at such high altitude, and so you have to you're trying to run like Monaco level downforce on your wings, even to generate like such low drag, because like the air is so thin that it's so hard to generate downforce. So you need like high downforce setups.
Yeah, we saw the Alfa Romeo Valtteri Bottas locking up into one of the turns. So Alfa Romeo, and he also got close with Max Verstappen. And Alfa Romeo, again, they also need a clean weekend as well. Bottas finishing the session in an impressive P4. So that was very good for him, whilst Zhou Guanyu was down there in P13. But if Alfa Romeo can score points with both their drivers, that's just what they need to finish in 7th.
Yeah, and so to round out the top 10 after Lewis Hamilton 7th, it was Esteban Ocon 8th, Oscar Piastri 9th in the McLaren, and then George Russell 10th in the Mercedes, who again was struggling.
Yeah.
And going on into FP3 now, we saw once again Alexander Albon was absolutely flying in his Williams. He put his Williams again into P2, but no one could still beat Max Verstappen, who made it again another fastest lap in this free practice session.
Yeah. Albon was once again flying up there for Williams as well, just like you said. And Sergio Perez in his Red Bull was up there in P3 again. Once again, he just couldn't seem to beat the Williams of Alex Albon. But Russell this time in this session, he was up there in P4 ahead of Hamilton. And so was Oscar Piastri, who was ahead of his teammate Lando Norris.
Yeah, and we also saw a lot of traffic too on these runs. Like Verstappen was complaining about traffic. And then we saw more just drivers like getting caught out by the dusty track, like George Russell and Valtteri Bottas getting caught, getting like oversteer at turn 7, turn 8.
Yeah.
And in this session, we saw both AlphaTauris really flying. Yuki Tsunoda was flying, and Daniel Ricciardo too.
Yeah.
So that would definitely make Williams and Alfa Romeo and Haas all their faces nervous if AlphaTauri scored big in this weekend.
Yeah, of course, Ricciardo knows a thing or two about how to get a good lap around Mexico City. Of course, he's a former pole sitter from 2018, so he definitely knows what to do.
Exactly, yeah. And we also saw again the Ferraris were flying, and Stroll in his Aston Martin too was pretty struggling in his Aston Martin. And then we saw Stroll block Carlos Sainz, at turn 8 again. So turn 8 becoming really famous this weekend. And Sainz did a 180 or 360-degree spin. And Leclerc also too got caught out. This time it was at like turn 9. So again, just more traffic coming out through these sections. We also saw turn 12 proving tricky for drivers again, as Pierre Gasly spun on the curb at turn 12, and then we saw a bunch of drivers running wide. Carlos Sainz, and then it was a McLaren of Oscar Piastri, and so the turn 12 curb just catching a lot of people out again.
Yeah, Nico Hulkenberg had to be wheeled back into the garage after some suspected suspension damage to his rear left. So they had to look at that.
Mm-hmm. But in the end of FP3, it was Max Verstappen P1 again. Yeah. Then Alex Albon was second, ahead again of Sergio Perez, who was third. Then came George Russell fourth, a better session for Mercedes, but they would wait to see until qualifying to see if they had pace. Then came Oscar Piastri fifth, then Valtteri Bottas sixth, and then Yuki Tsunoda was seventh, Lando Norris eighth, Daniel Ricciardo ninth, and Lewis Hamilton rounding out the top 10.
Yeah, so going into qualifying to set the grid for the Mexico City Grand Prix. And going into the very end of Q1 then, it was Verstappen currently at the top, ahead of Piastri in P2. But then it was both Aussies up there, two Aussies in the top 3, because Ricciardo was up there in P3, so it was P3 for car number 3. And then there were a lot of drivers behind looking to set times and improve their times to get out into Q2. One of those being Lance Stroll, currently in P18. As he crossed the line now, he could not improve his time, so that was it for Lance Stroll. He was out of qualifying. Then came Nico Hulkenberg, who was provisionally out of qualifying for the moment, and as he crossed the line, he couldn't improve his time, and this is because of a suspected yellow flag in sector 3. It was Fernando Alonso, so a lot of drivers had to back off.
Yeah, we saw Alonso ended up spinning at turn 2, and that brought out a yellow flag for a lot of people, and so that was really unfortunate for drivers like Hulkenberg, who got caught out by those yellow flags. And I think Lando Norris got caught out by it too. Yeah. But also it was discovered this before qualifying too, that Yuki Tsunoda would have to get engine penalties because of, in FP1, Isaac Hadjo, when he was driving, there was an engine failure too, I think. And so Tsunoda would be sent to the back of the grid, and so that meant that AlphaTauri played this strategically, and they decided to let Tsunoda give Ricciardo a tow, and so Ricciardo was flying along always, he got the tow in on the straights, but he was also making it stick through the corners. So Ricciardo was up there all consistently in the top 5.
Yeah, and so there was also a lot of traffic at the end of the pit lane with drivers trying to get out. There was massive queues, and one driver who was hurt a lot and probably the most was Logan Sargent, as he could not even set a lap time. So Sargent was out of qualifying, and the 5 that we lost from Q1 were Ocon, Magnussen, Stroll, Norris, and then of course Logan Sargent with no time set. So going on into Q2 now, and towards the end, Verstappen was up there in P1, Piastri in P2 again, and then Ricciardo up there in P3 again.
Yeah, it was really good. Again, Piastri and Ricciardo showing lots of consistency. Yeah. We saw the Ferraris coming towards the line to improve their times, and Leclerc went up into 4th position, and then Daniel Ricciardo went into P2, less than a tenth of a second behind Max Verstappen.
Very impressive.
Exactly, in an AlphaTauri too. Yeah. And then we saw Valtteri Bottas go up to P5, so that improved his place. And Pierre Gasly was under pressure. He was 14th in his Alpine, and Gasly went up to 10th as the flag fell. But that would be really risky. And Zhou Guanyu went up to 10th, so Gasly was out. Then came Lewis Hamilton, who out of nowhere went from 8th to 1st, as George Russell went to 3rd fastest. So that was really impressive from both Mercedes. Yeah. Then came Alex Albon out of the final corner, and Albon put his Williams up into the top 10, and so that knocked out Zhou Guanyu. And it was really disappointing too for Fernando Alonso and Nico Hulkenberg, who looked to have pace earlier this weekend but couldn't find any. And then Yuki Tsunoda didn't have a lap time set because he would get sent to the back of the grid. But then it was discovered that Alex Albon lost his time due to track limits.
Yeah, at turn two, he took a lot of inside curve, and so he just all four wheels were outside the white line, so his lap time was deleted. So unfortunately, he would be in P14.
Exactly. So now going on into Q3 now, and as we saw the first runs, Perez would set the pace. He did his with a time of a 117.7, and then we saw the Ferraris were flying out of nowhere too. But we saw Max Verstappen cross the line and beat Perez by 5/10 of a second, and so Verstappen went fastest ahead of Sergio Perez. Then we waited for the Ferrari challenge, but before that, Daniel Ricciardo crossed the line, and without a tow, just pure performance from him, he went into P2 by less than a tenth of a second behind Max Verstappen, blitzing the second sector. So that was a really strong effort from Daniel Ricciardo, and a really great lap from him. And then out of nowhere, Carlos Sainz came across the line. Sainz went fastest overall, and then Charles Leclerc beat Carlos Sainz. So Ferrari out of nowhere found a front row lockout provisionally, as they had their cars 1 and 2, with Oscar Piastri going 6th, and then both Mercedes crossed the line. Russell was only 5th. Hamilton was 6th, so they couldn't even beat Ricciardo's time in the AlphaTauri. So the Mercedes were really struggling.
Yeah, and then going on into final set of runs, then Carlos Sainz looking to improve his time and trying to get provisional pole, but at the moment it looked like he wasn't going to be able to do it with yellow first sector and yellow second sector. It wasn't looking good for the Spaniard. As he crossed the line, he didn't improve at all, so at the moment it was Leclerc who could just deny him pole position.
Then Ricciardo came and crossed the line. Ricciardo couldn't do anything. He stayed 4th fastest, but there was still a strong effort from Ricciardo. Leclerc crossed the line and he couldn't beat his time. He was 6/10 down on his previous best. Sergio Perez on new tires crossed the line, 5th fastest, but he couldn't even beat Daniel Ricciardo's time in the AlphaTauri. So Ricciardo in an AlphaTauri out-qualified Perez in a Red Bull. Then Verstappen crossed the line and he couldn't beat the Ferraris. He only stayed 3rd on the grid. So Ferrari out of nowhere, they found a front row lockout. Charles Leclerc was on pole and Carlos Sainz was 2nd. As we saw the Mercedes not improving their times, Hamilton went up to 6th though, but Russell stayed 8th fastest. So that was not at all good for the Mercedes drivers. But Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz delivered for Ferrari, and Daniel Ricciardo take a bow for him because P4 out qualifying a Red Bull and starting on the 2nd row in an AlphaTauri. Really
very good drive. So moving on into the main Grand Prix then, and to see whether Ferrari could finally take a win again, whether Ricciardo could maybe snatch a podium or at least score a lot of points. We would have to wait to see, or even whether Perez could surprisingly take a win at his home Grand Prix. So as the 5 lights came on then, and as it was lights out for the Mexico City Grand Prix, looked like it was going to be a very good start there from Carlos Sainz, but then out of nowhere we saw Max Verstappen shoot off the line from P3, and it was now wheel to wheel in splitting the 2 Ferraris, and Sainz was sort of left in the dust, literally in the dust, because there's a lot of dust on the track. But then Leclerc was now being put under immense pressure from Max Verstappen, who now had the inside line, but then Leclerc had 1 Red Bull on his inside and 1 on the outside, as Perez tried to go around the outside and pull a Max Verstappen 2021 and go around the outside, but this time it didn't work out for Perez, as he turned in on Leclerc and bounced over Leclerc's front left tire and went shooting off into the distance, and Perez had suffered immense damage and would now be running last.
Yeah, hugely disappointing for Sergio Perez. I understand that he would want to go for it in his home race, but at the same time, he threw away a lot of points, and so, especially when he's fighting for P2 in the championship, I don't think it was that sensible of a move. I mean, he saw the space, which was fine, but then he was way too aggressive on Leclerc, and that ultimately cost him dear. But now exiting turn 2 and turn 3.
Yeah, Leclerc had damage as well too.
Exiting turn 1 and exiting turn 3, you could see Leclerc's front end plate get damaged. Verstappen led into turn 4, then came Leclerc and Sainz, and we saw Ricciardo going down the outside of Lewis Hamilton. So Ricciardo late braking against Lewis Hamilton, and he found his place into, I think it was
P4.
into P4, but it was down into turn 4 and turn 5 too.
Yeah.
So Ricardo kept position and he stayed ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton was trying to fight back, but ultimately Ricardo won that battle as they approached turn 7 and turn 8.
Yeah, so moving on to lap 2, then it was heartbreak for Perez in his home race as he was forced to retire, and he was not at all happy about that. After finishing on the podium here twice before in his Red Bull, now he was out.
Yeah, it was similar to like an Alonso Hamilton Spa 2022 crash.
Yeah,
where he
very
went
much like
airborne.
that, yeah.
Exactly.
We also saw Yuki Tsunoda trying to overtake one of the Hasses of Kevin Magnussen into turn 1, but he just locked up and went straight over the grass and had to give the place back.
Yeah, overly ambitious from Yuki Tsunoda trying to get the move. Tsunoda knows that his car is fast underneath him, seeing how well Ricardo is doing. So it was a big opportunity for AlphaTauri to score big points.
Yeah. We saw then on lap 11, we saw Lewis Hamilton get past Daniel Ricciardo into turn 1. So Ricciardo now just having to kind of defend from these quicker cars, maybe from the Mercedes, but anything below the Mercedes, I think Ricciardo could take. So he would have to be aware of that. And then we also saw George Russell being putting the pressure on Oscar Piastri, but Piastri just holding it off. And moving on to lap 20, then we saw Verstappen come into the pits to make a change of tires. And we also saw the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz being put under pressure from Lewis Hamilton. And into turn 1, then Sainz was able to just keep Hamilton back.
Going on to lap 29 now, Lando Norris was on a charge. He was charging from the back of the grid. And so Lando Norris into turn 4 went round the outside of Valtteri Bottas and made that stick into turn 5. So it was a really good move from Lando Norris again. Yeah. And then going on into lap 31, we saw the Ferraris pitting. It was first Carlos Sainz, and we waited to see if Hamilton's undercut would have worked for him. And in the end, Hamilton did come out a long way ahead of Carlos Sainz. So the strategy did work out for Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes.
Yeah, moving on to lap 31 now. Lando Norris was putting the pressure on Alex Albon and using the DRS and slipstream to get past, and into turn 1, Norris moved up into P8 ahead of Albon, who was running in 9th, as we also saw Lance Stroll come into the pits.
Yeah, so Lando Norris was absolutely flying in the McLaren because he obviously needed to charge from the back of the grid, and the McLaren is a really quick car. Yeah. So it was just a matter of whether Norris could deliver or not. Like sometimes we've seen Norris not being able to deliver, but this time we definitely saw Lando Norris delivering the moves. And we also saw Kevin Magnussen going wide out of the final corner, and that compromised him as Logan Sargent was able to put him under pressure.
Yeah. And now moving on to lap 32, Leclerc finally came into the pits to put on a set of hard tires. So Verstappen once again took the lead, and Leclerc came out ahead of Hamilton. But then moving on to one lap later on lap 33, there was a yellow flag in sector 2, and it was a massive crash for Kevin Magnussen at the S section.
Starting at turn 7 and turn 8.
Yeah, it was a massive crash for him, and looking at the replays, it was a failure of the left rear suspension, which caused him to lose the tire, and then he effectively just drove straight into the wall, and the car just shattered to pieces.
And there was so much damage and debris, they had to red flag the session, so the session would be red flagged and then resumed on lap 36.
Yeah, on lap 36, it was a standing start. So once again, we would see 5 lights on in Mexico City.
Yeah, and under red flag conditions, you were able to change your tires and stuff. So you can repair damage too. So drivers would be all on new sets of tires as they look to maximize their race again.
Yeah, so as the 5 lights went out, then it was Verstappen on pole, Leclerc on the front row. Verstappen shot away into the lead. Hamilton put the pressure on immediately on Leclerc, and Sainz was forced onto the grass. And then he was now under pressure from Daniel Ricciardo coming in from 5th on the grid. So into turn 1, Verstappen led from Leclerc. Hamilton tried to go to the inside. Sainz had to hold Russell off. Then Piastri lost out to Daniel Ricciardo, and Ricciardo then went around the outside of Russell, but then he made contact with Russell and had to settle for 6th.
Yeah, so Ricciardo was pretty aggressive off the line, but Verstappen was just flying out in front, and then he would be extending his lead frequently.
Yeah.
And going on into lap 40, we saw Lewis Hamilton making his way past Charles Leclerc into turn 1. So Lewis Hamilton was finding a lot of pace in his Mercedes in this middle stage of the race, and we might possibly even see Lewis Hamilton maintaining a gap to Max Verstappen. That would be pretty interesting too. Going on to lap 48, then we saw Yuki Tsunoda and Oscar Piastri getting really close. Tsunoda couldn't get him out of turn 3, so he had DRS though, and Tsunoda tried to go down the outside of Piastri into turn 4, but ultimately Piastri won that battle.
Yeah, moving on to lap 49 now. Tsunoda tried to get Piastri around the outside at turn 1, but this time Tsunoda made contact with Piastri's front left. He was Tsunoda's rear right with Piastri's front left, and they made contact, and Tsunoda just went flying off into the first turn, and that absolutely ruined Tsunoda's race. So he threw away easy points that would have been for AlphaTauri, and major points that could save them millions of dollars or earn them millions of dollars. He had now thrown away what could have been a doubles points finish for AlphaTauri, would now see if Ricciardo could just do it by himself.
Yeah, Sonoda did the same thing as Perez. He squeezed Oscar Piastri out, and so ultimately it was Sonoda's own fault there. But going on to lap 49, then we saw Lando Norris again flying. This time he went around the outside of Alex Albon into turn 4 and then into turn 5. So Norris was absolutely flying in the McLaren.
Moving on to lap 56 now. It was a driver swap at McLaren as Norris was let through on Oscar Piastri, and Norris would now chase after Daniel Ricciardo, his former teammate, to see whether he could get up into 6th. And certainly he did. By come lap 60, Norris was now on the rear of Daniel Ricciardo, and using the second DRS zone, Norris went down the inside or around the outside, which then would turn to the inside, and Norris was able to get past his former teammate Ricciardo.
Ricciardo put up a good defense, but ultimately Norris was really fast, and Norris quickly then was right over the back of George Russell, and he pulled off a great switchback into turn 5, and then had the inside line for 6 and 7. So a really good move from Lando Norris, and that compromised George Russell, who was struggling on his tires, and so Ricciardo pretty soon went all over the back of it. And meanwhile, all hell was breaking out at the stadium section as we saw Valtteri Bottas drive straight into the side of Lance Stroll, who, to be fair to Bottas, Stroll came absolutely out of nowhere into Bottas. It was turn 13, and so that sent the Canadian round, and Valtteri Bottas ended up getting some damage too. So I don't know what kind of Stroll was thinking there.
And this allowed Sargent to move his way up into P12. So what would have been a pretty good P12 for Logan Sargent was looking good for him. But then Williams decided to retire him on the last lap because of an issue with his car. So that was so unfortunate for Sargent, who would have recorded a very good P12 finish and a very consistent P12 finish, now turned into a retirement again for him. But a man who didn't retire, who hasn't been retiring a lot this season, was Max Verstappen, who out of the final corner came and won the Mexico City Grand Prix for a 5th time in Mexico. It was a really good result from him, and another win for Red Bull. And Lewis Hamilton crossed the line to take the fastest lap and take another podium for Mercedes, and Charles Leclerc came through to complete the podium for Ferrari.
It was a really strong result for Ferrari too, as Leclerc finished 3rd and Sainz finished 4th. So a really strong drive for both the Ferraris after starting on the front row. Then came Lando Norris for one of the best drives of his career, all the way from the back, from 19th to 5th. So credit to him.
Very impressive.
Then George Russell came across the line 6th, and he just held off a charging Daniel Ricciardo. And Ricciardo scored his first points of the year, and he scored an incredible 6 points for AlphaTauri, which for the bottom of the championship is a lot. And that propelled AlphaTauri to 8th in the championship, right behind Williams too. So Ricciardo, this was definitely the Ricciardo of old that we've seen before. He definitely showed that he still has it, and I think he outperformed Perez this weekend too.
Yeah, probably.
Because Ricciardo knew he had a fast car and decided to play it safe, but also he knew when to unnecessarily pull off moves and how to keep his car in the points. Whereas Perez kind of kamikazed into turn 1. I know it's his home race and stuff, but still he threw away big points, especially with Hamilton's podium here. And so it was a really strong drive from Daniel
Yeah.
Ricciardo and major points for AlphaTauri. Then Oscar Piastri's countryman came home in 8th.
Yeah.
Alex Albon scored more points for Williams in 2nd.
Yeah,
So
very important points for Williams as well.
exactly, it was damage limitation for them. And then
Yeah.
Esteban Ocon rounded off the top 10 with 1 point for Alpine.
Yeah, so overall a very enjoyable Mexico City Grand Prix with lots of overtaking and lots of good action. Well, that's it for this Mexico City Grand Prix. And thank you guys for listening to this episode of our podcast. And be sure to join us next time as we take a look at the 2023 Sao Paulo Grand Prix. Thank you.